Pokopia DLC is coming out next month. I'm pretty excited for it. And the first wave is going to have one map. The second wave is going to have some additional features, whatever the heck that means. And then the third wave will also have one additional map to explore. And these maps, of course, will have Pokemon in them. And so today I'd like to discuss my wish list for the Pokemon that will be in the DLC, as well as just discuss generally the maps that I expect them to be or hope that they are. So let's talk about the rules here for my list. The current Pokedex, ignoring the event Pokemon like Sableye or Hoppip, there are 300 Pokemon in the base game, and there are 5 zones in the base game. Even Pallet Town, does have a few exclusive Pokemon to it, and so if you average all of the Pokemon across the 5 zones, you end up getting 60 Pokemon per zone. Now, it's important to remember that gender or form differences, they don't take up more slots. So, for example, if you're looking at Tatsugiri is just 1 slot, but there are 3 Tatsugiris you can get out of it. So if Pokemon on the list have 2 forms that we want to pull out, either gendered or otherwise, we can just still slot those in to 1 slot, and that's totally acceptable by the rules of the Pokedex as currently established. Now there are 2 zones, like I said, added for the DLC, and so if we say 60 Pokemon per zone and there's 2 zones, then that means that we could have about 120 Pokemon added in the DLC just from the DLC alone. Again, there will probably be more events as time goes on, and those will also introduce Pokemon, but the DLC could have around 120. That being said, I don't necessarily expect 120 Pokemon, but given what we saw in the base game, we can just use this as a reference for my wish list. So I'm just going to have 120 Pokemon on this wish list, but I'm not holding them to have 120 Pokemon. They could have 150 Pokemon, or they could have 80 Pokemon. I doubt they'd have fewer than 80 Pokemon, just as an arbitrary number, because otherwise you wouldn't be able to populate these new zones with Pokemon at the same density as the old ones, unless the maps are very small, which I think most people would find very disappointing. Now, just to get them out of the way, we already have a few Pokemon that have been revealed. On this list, I'll have images up on the screen, and I'm just going to put in the fully evolved Pokemon because it would be a pain to drag in all the images for all of the pre-evolveds, but the pre-evolveds also take up a slot in the Pokedex. So, for example, we have Primarina, and that means that Poplio and Brionne are also in the Pokedex. That's 3 slots, and so we have to keep that in mind when we're counting up to 120, that all of the other guys also count too, even though only the fully evolveds will be on the screen. The one fly in the ointment here is Fionn gonna be in the game just because Manaphy's in the game? Well, Fionn? Maybe not. I would assume so, but it's not a pre-evolution of Manaphy, technically speaking. So technically speaking, it doesn't have to be in the game. But technically speaking, it would be really lame if it weren't in the game. So I'm going to say that 9 Pokemon have been revealed, and that's true. But if we suppose that Fionn is in the game, then that would bring this up to 10. We'll revisit Fionn later on in the video when we talk about legendary and mythical Pokemon, and just toss in the list at that point. But for right now, we can say we have 9 Pokemon that are actually confirmed and revealed that we know will be in the game. Let's also talk about something, broadly speaking, that's pretty important. And you may not notice it when you're first initially playing the game, but the starter Pokemon are going to get some special treatment by the developers because, starters are the golden children of the games, along with, the few other special Pokemon like Lucario or Mewtwo or whatever. So they have to be careful and respectful of the various generations of Pokemon. And aside from Generation 1, which got all 3 of the starters already in the game, every other generation in Pokopia only has 1 starter line for each generation. And this isn't something I noticed when I was first playing the game, but then when I went back and looked at the list, it became pretty obvious how they were doing it, right? It's just one per gen, and we try to keep the types balanced in terms of number that they have. That being said, there are 9 generations, and there are 3 types. But Generation 1 got all of them in, and fair enough, it is Kanto, so they should be all in there. So there's actually only 8 generations to pull from, and there are 3 types, which means there's going to be one type that is short. And that actually was water in the first one, because in the base game, fire has generations 2, 3, and 8, and grass has generations 5, 7, and 9, but water only had generations 4 and 6. So you only had 2 water starters in the base game aside from Blastoise. So this time around, we should choose 3 water starters for sure, and then we're going to choose 3 of another type, and then one type will have to get the short end of the stick and only get 2. But that's fine. The only way that we could perfectly balance it out is if the DLC had all of the starters. And that is a possibility, but I think it would be sort of, maybe not lame, but it would just be so starter heavy to have 5 zones for the first base game. And in those 5 zones, you only have 1 starter line for each generation. And then for the 2 zones in the DLC, you're just going to put all the other starters. That's a lot of starter Pokemon. So I think you should only have 1 additional set from each generation. Now, we saw before that Swampert and Primarina are already announced and revealed for the game, so we can strike those off the list. And now we just have to choose 1 more water type, and I chose Samurott. And part of this was a wish list, so I'm going to be preferentially picking starters that I like more than the other starters, but then some of the things sort of just shake out. So let's take Generation 2 as an example. So you already have Typhlosion in the base game. Now you can choose between Meganium or Feraligatr. If you choose Meganium, then you still have 2 grass types and a water type you can choose for later gens, whereas if you choose Feraligatr, that means you're not allowed to choose a water type for the rest of the generations. And given what I was trying to choose for my biomes in the DLC, these ones, in combination with starters I actually do like, this made for the best match. So 2 of these starter types are going to be going to the Bubbly Beach biome, which has already been revealed, alongside Primarina and Swampert, and then the other 4 are going to be going to the new biome that will be coming out later. And that should give us 4 starters in the first biome, 4 starters in the second biome, and that should be reasonably balanced. So briefly, let's talk about the Bubbly Basin biome and sort of what I hope for it to look like. This is just important because we want to establish what kind of Pokemon could fit in such a biome, because we want to make sure that whatever Pokemon we choose on our list would be suited to the biome that we know has already been revealed, as well as the biome that I hope will come out later on. So Bubbly biome, a lot of it is going to be underwater, so we should expect a lot of fish Pokemon, a lot of Pokemon that are going to be able to use the underwater to their advantage. And what, of course, can you find underwater? The most exciting and interesting thing to find underwater would be, I suppose, a coral reef. You could have maybe like a big old trench or something if you wanted to go vertically deep, but a coral reef is going to be the most colorful and interesting thing to build a habitat in. And so I expect it is to be a more tropical, warm water kind of environment. Now, I believe this is supposed to be based off of Cerulean City. Cerulean City is more inland compared to something like Fuchsia City, but at the same time, it still does have access to water. And is it correct for it to have a coral reef? I don't know, but I frankly don't really care. I think that if you have Manaphy, you've already committed yourself to the deep open ocean kind of water biome, and so you might as well put a coral reef there because it would be the most exciting thing to look at underwater. And if we're going to go with a coral reef and a more tropical kind of water, then I think that on land we could also have a more tropical feel to things. I don't think we necessarily want to go full tropical. We already had a lot of that in the base game with Bleak Beach. So Bleak Beach does, of course, have the resort feel to it, and so we don't want to have a resort feel to this. But I'm thinking more of a jungle feel, and this is one of the wishes that I have for Pokopia. So when you are building things in Pokopia, depending on what you want to build, you may run into a block where you're like, oh, I can't really build this properly because I don't have the right materials. And one of the biomes that I would like to build is more of a jungle or a rainforest kind of environment, but we don't really have the trees for it. We have palm trees, and that's it. Because you could either have that or evergreens, and evergreens don't belong in that kind of environment, really. And then you can have like berry trees. So it really, you want to have some better tropical trees and things of that nature so that you could put in your Vileplume and your Victory Bell and stuff like that into an area that makes a lot of sense for it. So I'm hoping that in the water you're gonna have a coral reef and a bunch of other watery things, I suppose. But then on land you'll have the beach area, and that'll be fine. It'll have shells and a lot of the sand that we've come to expect already. But then after you hit the sand, you'll hit sort of a strip of grass and then a jungle zone where there'll be dense foliage, vines, things like that. And so then we should expect the Pokemon to reflect that. So as we get into the Pokemon, let's first talk about a little side mission we have, which is to get something to dig out of the ground, and that's fossils. So in all of the previous zones in Pokopia, we have fossils in an area, and you can dig them out. And here we should expect to have fossils as well, because why not? And this is Kanto, and yet we only have Aerodactyl so far, so I don't see any reason why we shouldn't put Omastar and Kabutops in the game. And I really want Kabutops in the game, so let's get that happening, please and thank you. Those will be fossils for this area. Spoiler alert, I'm actually not going to put fossils in the later area, but that'll be for a separate reason that we'll discuss later on. But technically these fossils could be put in that area. There are some duplicate fossil spawns, depending on the zone you're in the base game, so these could be applied to both, but we'll count them towards the Bubbly Basin Pokedex. Now, in Bubbly Basin, because there's a bunch of water, and there's a bunch of water you're supposed to not just be around, but you're supposed to go down into, we should expect a lot of Pokemon that can enjoy being in the water. So I actually ended up with my list having a lot fewer of those Pokemon than I maybe would have expected initially. You know, I was thinking about it, you could still fill this list out with nothing but water Pokemon. I still don't even have Pokemon like Lumineon or Huntail. There's a whole bunch of Pokemon that could go on this list. Even something like Electros technically wouldn't be a water type that could go on this list, but Electros isn't really a Pokemon that goes down into the water, and we want Pokemon that go down into the water. And I don't want to spam just water types. I think we should have good type variety. And when you just look at water type, or Pokemon that go in the water, it's mostly, if not all, water types. And at that point, you're just clogging up your entire Pokedex with water types, which I think is a little bit unfair. So we want a good healthy amount. We already have Primarina, we already have Manaphy, so let's get some more in there, and then we'll move on and get some other Pokemon. So first off on the list, not because it's most important, just because it happens to be first on the list, is Corsola. Corsola is an interesting Pokemon because we are in a natural disaster kind of game, right? The whole point of this game is that, the world has been ravaged by natural disasters, most of them human inflicted. And so you would think that the coral reef is going to start off dead. And it may actually start off dead. I'm not really sure how they're going to do that. In Bleak Beach, for example, there was polluted ground, and you had to put bubbles on it, and then you could clean it off, which was actually sort of an annoying mechanic, frankly. But how would you clean up a coral reef? You don't have the magic school bus, so I don't really know how one does that with Pokemon moves. That being said, you could imagine a dead coral reef, and then you could have Galarian Corsola and Cursula, but those then would, I think, need to be pre-existing, because it wouldn't make any sense to me to clean up an area and then a dead Corsola comes in to the habitat. No, it would make more sense to clean up the area and have the live, healthy Corsola come into the habitat. So on this list, I just put down normal Corsola, but I would concede that if you made a pre-existing Cursula in the area, that Cursula, a Galarian Corsola, would also make a lot of sense. I just would prefer normal Corsola. I think it's a lot way cuter. Tentacruel makes a lot of sense. I don't see any reason why Tentacruel wouldn't be in this DLC. I actually fully expect Tentacruel to be in the game. Anybody who's ever done a bit of surfing in Kanto will know that it's mostly just tentacles. So that should definitely be in the game. Melodic is the counterpart to Gyarados, and as a very pretty Pokemon, should be in the game. It's a Pokemon that spends all of its time in the water, as opposed to Gyarados, who does a lot of flying. Melodic does not fly and is all the time in the water. So Gyarados was good for the base game, but Melodic is much better for a water-based setting, and so I do expect Melodic to be in the game as well. I would like to see Love Disc in the game just because it's a very aesthetically pleasing Pokemon, and Pokopia is different from the main games in the sense that what purpose does a Love Disc serve in the main games other than to give YouTubers a Pokemon to use in Nuzlocke challenges or to beat up for heart scales? It's not a good Pokemon, and it doesn't really want to be on your team, or rather, you don't want it to be on your team. But in Pokopia, none of that matters. All that matters is, do you think it's a cute Pokemon? Or do you like that Pokemon? Good, put it in the environment. And a heart-shaped Pokemon is going to do really well in a lot of different environments. So I think that Love Disc makes a lot of sense to be in the game. Next up, we got Cloyster. Cloyster could go in this area, or it could go in the other area that I'm going to introduce after this. But I put it here because I think Shelter makes more sense to be on a beach. And so this would be more of a beach-based Pokemon. Maybe it doesn't fit the tropical warm water aesthetic quite as well. And so there's some finagling you could do with this list. But I think Cloyster makes a lot of sense to be in the DLC one way or another. And then Starmie, for a very similar reason, you know, Starfish should be on the beach, makes sense. And Starmie is a good candidate because it can go above the water and it could also go below the water. So it really is more amphibious than most other Pokemon. Like something like Magikarp, technically currently in the game, can go on land, as well as Slowpoke or whatever. And Slowpoke is actually a good example, maybe of a Pokemon that could go in the water as well, but usually it spends most of its time on the water edge. Whereas as a Starfish, Starmie really is good at getting in and out of water, and even under the water. So it can float above the water, it can go under the water, it can go out of the water pretty naturally. And so I think it would be a good candidate. Finally, I've got Dondozo here. Dondozo is the one I'm least sure about, because Dondozo is huge as a Pokemon, and Kyogre currently in the game does not get to play with all the other Pokemon because it is so big, and Kyogre is dwarfed by Dondozo. So if Dondozo is bigger than Kyogre, then how the heck is it going to be in a map? That being said, Dondozo should sort of be in the game because Tatsugiri's in the game. So if Tatsugiri's in the game, then why wouldn't Dondozo be in the game? It doesn't have to be, but I sort of figure, it makes sense for it to be in the game at least. Okay, so now let's talk about the Pokemon that I would like to see out of the water. Let's start off with my favorite Pokemon of all time, which is Emolga. We've got a lot of Pika clones already in the game. We've got Plusle and Minun. We've got, technically we have a Azumarill, if you count that as a Pika clone. And we have Dedenne. So I would like to see another Pika clone in the game, or two. Oh yeah, we also have Palma, I forgot. We have Palma. And so Dedenne, Emolga would be a good candidate because it can fly, so it has a little more accessibility in water zones, and it's a Pokemon that really likes the trees, so a tree-based land would be good for it. Let's talk about Scolipede next. Scolipede is a pretty good fit for a jungle environment and would be a pretty solid counterbalance to a lot of the other Pokemon on this list. You know, we have a lot of cute water types, a lot of cute fairy types on the list, at least that I've chosen. So good to have something a little more edgy, more poison based. So I would like to see Scolipede. I do like Scolipede a lot, even though I don't really like its Mega Evolutions stat line. The Scolipede is still fine in my book, and I would like to have it in my game for sure. Kleavor, let's talk about that. Scyther and Scizor are already in the game, so even though I already said before that you have to count all the pre-evos to the list, Kleavor is the exception to that because you already have Scyther and Scizor in the game, so only Kleavor would need to come. This one is more of a wishful thinking on my part, but we already have Pokemon like Clodsire in the game, so regional variants, totally acceptable, and Hisuian Pokemon, I don't remember of any of them being in the game, but I don't really see a reason why they couldn't be in the game. If Haldean Wooper is in the game, that's a regional form, and I know Kleavor is not a regional form, but it should still be able to be gotten. So let's put that in, and it will also do quite well in a jungle environment. We've got Lycanroc. Lycanroc will have all three forms, but all three forms will still take up one Pokedex slot. So you actually get 3 Pokemon for the price of 1, similar to Tatsugiri. Maybe a little bit more work on the developer's part, but you know, Lycanroc is a fan favorite for a lot of people, and would be good to have a Pokemon that's like one of the first things you do when you enter into a new zone in Pokopia is you always put down the grass, put down the 4 grass patches, and that will always get you a Pokemon. And you know, something like Rockruff, that's probably a good example of a Pokemon that would live in a patch of grass. Next up, let's talk about Annihilate. So if we're gonna have a rainforest jungle kind of environment at the outskirts of the beach, then it would make sense to have monkeys in it, and we're gonna have Annihilate as one of the monkeys. Another monkey will be Rillaboom, actually. So that's 2 monkeys, and having Minky, Primeape, Annihilate makes a lot of sense in Kanto, so that's pretty good. Ledian, we already have Ariados in the game, and Ledian would be a good Pokemon for this. Not only is it colorful and will fit sort of the theme of this area, which is going to be bright and vibrant, but it also can fly. So similarly to Emolga, it's going to be able to get around in a water-based thing a lot better than some of these other Pokemon. Now let's actually skip over to Rabombi, which is on the list for a very similar reason. Another cute bug type that's going to be flying a bunch, so it can get around. Toucanon can fly, I suppose, but it's mostly here because, hey, if we're gonna have a jungle, gotta have the toucan, right? So that totally makes sense. Hatterene is here, mostly because I do like Hatterene as a Pokemon, and I think it would be sort of interesting to have a Pokemon that is serene, I suppose, but doesn't necessarily fit the water theme. Not everything has to be aggressively water themed. And I also have a lot of the jungle theme, and this is another Pokemon that isn't aggressively jungle themed. So I think it would be good to put in because you could put it basically anywhere that you want. And I think that's one of the most important things about designing these maps is where can you put the Pokemon? You want to be able to put the Pokemon in a place that makes sense, but you also want to be able to put them in a lot of different places. You don't want to have a map where only one spot on the map really makes any sense to put the Pokemon. Or at least that's my thinking. I think Hatterene is a pretty good Pokemon at just living anywhere. I mean, obviously it's not going to live under the water, but we already have Pokemon to put under the water. This can go in the beach, it can go even in the jungle if you really wanted to. You can make it a little tunnel underneath the water, and it could live down there in a little glass house even. You can imagine lots of different things you could do with a very colorful Hatterene in a very colorful environment. Togekiss, another Pokemon that flies. Togekiss is another fan favorite, right? How many people love the Togepi? And you're gonna have to have the Togepi somewhere in this game. It's been a while since we've had Togepi in the games for us to play with, since it wasn't in Scarlet Violet. So I would like to see it in Pokopia. Tropius, of course, the quintessential like jungle Pokemon. It's got bananas on its head, and it would also be able to fly, so it has that mobility factor as well. And then Yanmega. So we have a pretty bug-heavy list here and a pretty flying-heavy list here, but that is in large part because of jungle theming, but also because it does help them get around a heavily water-based map. And if it's something like Bleak Beach, as we saw over there, I felt like most of the Pokemon sort of just lived on the main island, and they couldn't really get around to the other areas. So unless you specifically built out those other areas, for example, I still have Audino trapped on the SS Anne because I haven't done anything with the SS Anne. So it's just living over there. It doesn't get to interact with any of the other Pokemon. Similarly, you got the little island, the resort island off in the distance. If there's a Pokemon over there, it can't get over to the mainland unless it flies. I think that's one of the weaknesses of Bleak Beach design-wise. It would be a good idea to have a way for Pokemon to get around. I know you have the lift system that they introduced later on, and the lifts could be put around the map, and then Pokemon can get from one area to another, but as far as I've been able to tell, they don't really know how to use them themselves. It's only good for when transporting the Pokemon yourself. So really, you want flying Pokemon to be able to just get around and do whatever they want to do. If you can have little islands and stuff. Obviously, the main focus of the DLC first map will be getting underwater, and of course, most of these Pokemon on this list cannot go underwater, so that might be a bit opposite from what I'm saying. But I think that this would still be the best opportunity for mobility for these Pokemon to be able to get to sandbars or floating castles if you decide to put them in. So that's enough of Bubbly Basin. Let's go on to the new map, which will be coming out in 2027. We don't know when in 2027, but I will propose that it would probably come out somewhere in February or maybe March. We have Bubbly Basin coming out in August. We have the quote-unquote additional new features coming out late 2026. So, maybe November. So then that would be another 3 months. And then 3 months from November would put us in February. And so February, or maybe March, is winter, or maybe early spring or something. Whereas Bubbly Basin is squarely in the summer category. So I would expect Bubbly Basin, therefore, to be more of a summery thing, and the new town in 2027 to be more winter themed. I also expect 2027's new town to be winter themed because we don't have any ice Pokemon in the game. I mean, most of you who've played Pokopia have already realized we don't have any ice Pokemon. We've got a fossil, we've got an evolution, we've got a legendary, we've got the one that teaches you how to surf, and then I think we have one other, and that's it. So, as opposed to all these other types that have pretty good representation, the ice types have very, very bad representation. We also don't have a lot of cold biome related blocks. For example, we don't have any tundra blocks. like you might have in Minecraft. We also don't have any snow at all in the game, and you would think that snow would be a pretty important thing. Let's say we have a Christmas event or something. Wouldn't it make sense to be able to make like, ho, 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 it's Delibird coming to deliver you presents, and there's no snow on the ground. Now, of course, if we have a Christmas event this year, well, we probably won't have snow because it's probably not going to be in Bubbly Basin. It didn't look like it was going to be in that biome. And so I guess we just won't have snow this year. But next year, if we have this new biome, then we could have snow. We could have more wintry biomes that would make sense for those kinds of events. So the biome that I'm inventing for my wish list is going to be called Craggy Peaks, and it's going to be comprised primarily of two areas. There's going to be a lowlands, foothills kind of area with mostly barren rock, and then there's going to be a icy area which is going to be much higher in elevation, and elevation will be one of the primary themes of this map. We had the area of Bubbly Basin, which had you going down into the water. Now we're going to be going up into a mountain, all on the same map. We already should be able to fly at this point in the game, so getting around the map won't be as onerous as it might have been in the base game, so you should have the ability to go around and move around the map a bit more effectively. There may be some lava areas or some caves that will have some lava in them, so we could have areas for more hot-based Pokemon as well, but maybe just like one or two. We're not trying to recreate Rocky Ridges, right? We're trying to make a different area, and so this isn't a volcano, but Craggy Peaks is what we're calling it, and the main purpose here is to give us some ice types in the game, but we're also going to get a bunch of other Pokemon as well. Now, what area would this be in Kanto? This would be the Seafoam Islands. We could make it technically Cinnabar Island, but we already have Bubbly Basin, which is a tropical map. And I suppose technically Seafoam Islands would also be a water-based map, but it should be less volcanic, of course. And then also, that's where all the ice types are in Kanto anyway. So if we want the ice types, we have to go to Seafoam Islands. But we're going to focus mostly on the island part and less on the seafoam part, right? Seafoam is surrounded by rocks, it's got water around it, but then you've got the cave systems inside, and that's what we're mostly trying to focus on. Now, of course, I don't remember in Seafoam there really being much in the way of magma or even hot springs, so maybe they'll figure out what the water and the heat is supposed to be like there, but that's sort of what I'm hoping to see in the DLC. So in the foothills area, we're gonna probably not have any of the ice types there. Of course, though, you could put any of the ice types down there if you felt like it, but down in the foothills, we're gonna put Pokemon like Furret or Beware, you know, just some standard normal types. We didn't really have any normal types in the first DLC, so we should probably put some here. We're also going to put Kingdra in because Seadra and Horsey were in the Seafoam Islands in the first game, so it makes sense to have Kingdra here as well. And it will live in the water area, right? But and there will be some water area. It wouldn't make any sense to give Bubbly Basin and you have the ability to get into the water and to just have zero water in this map. I think you should have some water, but we're not going to focus on the water Pokemon because we literally just did a map where we had like a third of the Pokemon be water types, right? So let's try to get away from the water types and just give them minimal representation. Then let's put Luxray in. If we remember from Legends Arceus, Luxray was in sort of the mountainous regions. Of course, Shinx was all over the place, so that's nothing special, but Luxray can be found in those kinds of areas, and I think it would be a pretty cool Pokemon to have. Phalanx is a really cute Pokemon. I'd love to have it in Pokopia. It would look really fun and would march all over your little map. That'll be really cute. And it would be good in the foothills as well. Salazzle is a Pokemon that, there's a couple fire types on this list, and it's like, okay, well, fire types can keep themselves warm against the cold, so fire types could live in the cold, but then would fire types be comfortable in the cold? Is a little bit unclear. But Salazzle does live on a mountain, a volcanic mountain, that being said, in Alola, so it could live in a more rocky, inhospitable kind of environment, and that's more what the foothills are like. They should be, not snowy down in the foothills, and only the snow is up in the peaks. I put Meowstic here, and I'm not gonna lie, Meowstic is mostly there because I want Meowstic to be in the game, but it could be anywhere, frankly. I just would like to have Meowstic here. Then we've got Heatmor and Durant. We need to have more love for these guys, and this would be a good area for them to be. They're already in a mountainous area in Unova, so it makes sense for them to be here too. And then we've got 3 ground types. This is going to be sort of ground and rock heavy, but it's a ground and rocky area, so it totally makes sense for them to be like that. You got Crocodile, you got Rhyperior, you got Mudstale, you got Rhydon in Kanto, right? So Rhyperior should probably be in the game. You also have Nidoking and Nidoqueen, and they didn't make the list, but they could also have been in the game. I don't know. It felt like Bubbly Basin was just too small land-wise to fit them, and it felt like more Pokemon that should be living in a jungle and less living in a barren, rocky wasteland. That felt more like a Rhydon thing to do, so that's why Rhyperior is here. Crocodile is here, and Mudstale is a draft horse. It makes sense for it to be in a colder climb, and so I'm pretty happy with my choices here for the foothills for the most part. And I think that gives us a passable amount of variety. I would have liked to have maybe seen a couple of grass types on this list, more than I have. But aside from that, I think it's a pretty good list. Then let's get up to the snowy regions. That was the whole point of this exercise. So we should have mostly ice types with maybe just a couple other non-ice types. Abomasnow. Abomasnow is another good candidate for a Christmas event in the game, and so I could totally see it being the Christmas Pokemon instead of Delibird, or maybe Jinx even. But Abomasnow is also just a good Pokemon in general for the base game, the base DLC, right? It should maybe be a good Pokemon for outside of an event, and Delibird, which is just the quintessential Christmas event Pokemon, would be a better event choice. So that's why we went with Abomasnow here. We also have some other ice types like Cryogonal, which I think should always be in any ice-based thing from now on. And then I did want to put in Glalie and Frostlass. I think those would be fantastic choices for a game like this. Then we'll have some non-ice types as well. You've got Seaking. Seaking is our other water type. We will have some rivers and waterways going through the Seafoam Islands, right? And so you would want to have some water types. And the Seaking makes a lot of sense. Again, this is Kanto. We want to flesh out the Kanto Pokedex as most as we can. Aggron, I think, would be sort of cool because it's a mountain, or because it's craggy peaks, right? We're at the top of the Seafoam Islands, where there's a bunch of snow and rocks, and it's going to be eating the rocks. And it seems like something that could survive in a harsh climate. And we'll talk more about Aggron here in a bit. We got Carbink, which is going to be cute and can live in the caves, and sort of looks sort of snowy anyway, even though it's not ice type, it's fire type. We got Drampa, because Drampa is another Pokemon that sort of lives in caves and mountains, secluded away from people, and Seafoam Islands is the one area of the map where, there isn't usually a town until you get Blaine's Gym there. And then Mamoswine is a strong connection between the foothills and the snowy peaks, because it's got both the ground type and the ice type together. Let's talk again about Aggron really fast, like I said we would. So in each area in Pokopia, you sort of get a new ability as Ditto, and I would like to have some new abilities for Ditto. We know that we'll get the ability to dive already, so that's not a problem. But then I would expect there to be a new ability in the second region as well. You could even have an ability in the middle DLC, right? They said there would be new features available then. Maybe you don't have to have a new map for an ability for Ditto. You could just do it somehow otherwise. But if we have a new ability in Craggy Peaks, what could it be? Well, we've got most of things covered with Magnemite already. So what do I want personally in Pokopia? I want more paint. I want more white and black paint, especially because those are all RNG based. In Pokopia, you have berries, and the berries give you paint, and they give you basically all the colors. If you want purple, for example, you'd have to combine red and blue paints to get purple, but you can get it. Black and white, however, you can't combine paints to get those. Instead, you have to randomly get them when a Pokemon that's creating the paint for you says, "Ooh, I did better than usual," and gives you black or white paint, depending on what berry you gave them. And that's really annoying. I know that you can buy paint as well from the Pokemon Center portal thing, and you can do that, but that's a time-gated resource. And if you're grinding out a resource-heavy project that needs a lot of black or white paint, and you have to rely on RNG of your Pokemon doing their little chores off to the side, that requires a lot of micromanaging, and that requires a lot of luck. And it's really annoying. So Aggron, as I mentioned before, eats rocks and crushes rocks. So I think it would be nice if Aggron taught you the ability, I don't know, we already have Rock Smash, but you could come up with something else, Bulldozer, or Rototiller even, I don't know, Steel Roller. And you have the ability to crush rocks. So if I crush a black rock, which is a block in the game, then that gives me black paint. 1 paint for each rock I crush. If I crush some sand, for example, some beach sand, or if I crush white rock, then I would get white paint. Maybe if I crush something that is brown, I could get some brown paint. And this would make it way faster for you to be able to get paint guaranteed every day. And you would just go to a dream island and you would just raise the thing to the ground. I think that would be really nice, because then I would have the ability to manufacture paint myself. Maybe it would still be a limited amount every day, but I mean, that's true of everything in Pokopia. You can only get a limited amount of anything in one particular day. There's no such thing as an unlimited resource like a cobblestone generator or something. That doesn't exist. So if you want a resource, it will be finite technically, but having an entire Dream Island's worth of paint available to you, depending on the paint color you want, I think makes a lot of sense. You could have white paint, brown paint, black paint, and then I think it would be good as well to add a couple extra berries. You could have a purple berry, and you could have maybe an orange berry or some other color berry that you could also use normally, and then that would give you more color options. Because, for example, currently you can't make any lavender in the game. Lavender paint is not a thing. So maybe you could make lavender paint a thing. Sometimes when you paint stuff purple, it turns out lavender. But frankly, I find that to be more of a failing on Pokopia's part than a success, because I should expect a block to look a certain color when it is painted. But the colors in this game are all over the place. Sometimes they'll expect it to come out light, and sometimes it'll come out dark, and vice versa. I'm not a big fan of how the colors turn out sometimes. It's sort of annoying. And you'd have more color options the more colors you give us. But Aggron gives us the ability to create our own black and white paint. That'd be really nice. Let's talk, let's loop back to the starter Pokemon really fast. I did mention before that 2 of them were going to go alongside Swampert and Primarina to Bubbly Basin. Those 2 are going to be Rillaboom, as mentioned before, and Meganium. Those will both be in the jungle area. And then Delphox, Skeledirge, Torterra, and Samurott will go to the Craggy Peaks. Samrock can, of course, be in the water. And then the Torterra and Skeletridge would be the lowlands, probably. Or at least they would be most likely to have their habitats be found in the lowlands. And you could put Delphox up in the ice area. You know, oftentimes they put Ninetales up in the snowy peaks of mountains. And they already have Ninetales in the game. So they sort of came out too early with that. So instead we'll put Delphox up as a replacement. And it sort of makes sense that it could be up there as some kind of mystical wizard of sorts. Let's now talk about legendaries. And let's start off with the roaming Pokemon. So Lugia and Ho-Oh are in the game, and you can't catch them or put them in a habitat or whatever. They're not going to be static on a map. They're going to fly in randomly and drop a feather randomly. Now, while this was pretty cool at the beginning of the game, by the end of the game, you don't really care about them at all. They just sort of appear, do their thing, and you don't even bother picking up the feather because you have enough Pokemetal that you can get whatever you want anyway. A bit of a wasted feature, but it would be good to at least get one other Pokemon up in the sky, and I think Rayquaza is the perfect Pokemon for that job. So let's put Rayquaza up there. You can drop a scale or something, and then you can go trade it in for some new items. And if you do that, then you can use the same mechanic you've already developed and expand upon it with a new Pokemon for the DLC. Bubbly Basin already has been shown to have Manaphy as a legendary or a mythical Pokemon. And so let's flesh out the rest of it with Fione. And then I'm actually going to put in a couple of Beasts of Ruin. We're going to have Chiyu and Wo-Chen. Chiyu, of course, is a fish Pokemon that is not a water type, so that gets like high marks for that alone, given that now I can have a fish that's not going to be a water type in my water-based map. Probably a good thing. And then Wo-Chen actually works perfectly in the jungle area of the map. Now, lest you think I'm forgetting about the other two, those two are going to go to Craggy Peaks. So, of course, we already had a bunch of ground types down in the lowlands or the foothills of Craggy Peaks, but Tinglu would do just fine down there as well, and Shenpao can frolic among the snowy tops of the peaks. Now, we already had Kyogre at the beginning of the game, and it doesn't join your party, but it does just show up randomly and make things rain. One could imagine that the Craggy Peaks is the opposite problem of the beginning of the game, where in the beginning they're like, oh, let's make this humid. What if, on the other hand, when you get to Craggy Peaks, everywhere is snowy all the time, and everything keeps snowing, and everybody's cold and shivering, and they want it to warm up just a little bit, and to just have the sun come out for a while so the snow can stop. You know, Narnia style or something, and Groudon would be the Pokemon that would be the boss of the zone that would bring out the sun finally. And that would be a good bookend to the beginning of the game with Kyogre, and we added Rayquaza to the sky, and so now we have that legendary trio. Don't have to have the legendary trios in this game, but I think it makes a lot of sense to just finally finish out those three instead of leaving Kyogre hanging, which doesn't really make any sense. Like, they put in Entei, and then in the Dream Islands they put in Suicune and Raikou. They put in the legendary birds all at once, and they had Mewtwo and Mew side by side. But then they have Kyogre just by itself. So I do think it makes a lot of sense to have Groudon, and Groudon can take away the snow and make it sunny. So that's my vote there. Then, just randomly, I want to put Melmetal in. I think that would be really cool to have a little Meltan running around the map. And you could have like a little workshop where you have Meltan and Tinkaton messing around or something. And then Diancie, we already put Carbink on the map, so let's put Diancie as another Pokemon. Finally, we already talked about fossil Pokemon, and it was a while ago, so maybe you forgot, but we want something to dig up on the map. And Bubbly Basin, we gave the Kanto fossils to. Now, the Kanto fossils could go as well on this map, But there's another thing that you can dig up in the game currently, and that is the pieces of the mural to get Mew. So once you have all the pieces of the mural, you can dig up more of them, which is sort of nice because on the back sides they actually have unknown letters, so you can spell out things with them. It's a sort of a pain to grind them out, but you can, copy them if you need to. And it would be good to have something new to dig out that's in that same vein. I don't know if you would dig out Zygarde cells, but remember the whole conceit of Pokopia is that there was a great environmental disaster, or multiple environmental disasters that drove all the humans off the planet, or at least out of Japan. And where is Zygarde? Isn't he the Pokemon that is supposed to restore balance to the world and deal with natural disasters? And he's not there. So I think it would be a great end to the game to have Zygarde come in, right? And say, hey, I'm going to help you deal with this natural disaster. I don't know how he'd help us. Maybe he would just stand there and look cool. And you'd probably not have him in 100% form. Although maybe you could change his form somehow. I'm not sure about that one. Because you would want to collect 100 cells. Like, that's the thing you're collecting. Instead of Mew murals, you're collecting cells. But maybe you could just collect enough to get Zydog, and that would only take 10 cells. That's pretty fast. And then after that, you would work your way up to 50, and you get Zygarde 50%. And then you could switch between the two, and then once you have all 100, you could switch between all three. And that could make a lot of sense. And so I do think that that would be a good thing to be able to dig up, and then you would have something to dig up in Craggy Peaks. And with Zygarde, we have gone over 120 Pokemon in the DLC. And it's sort of crazy because there's a bunch of Pokemon you could say, well, what about this Pokemon? Well, what about that Pokemon? Oh, you completely forgot about this Pokemon that would totally make sense. Of course I did. The problem is that we only have 120 Pokemon to work with on this list. And there are a lot more Pokemon than 120. So we have to pick and choose which ones we're going to do. And really, even though the DLC is $35, and that's a pretty pricey DLC, we've seen DLCs for that price have far less value. I'm looking at you, Zelda. So having 120 Pokemon, I think, is actually pretty optimistic. I'd like there to be that many or more. And if there are that many, I would like them to probably be these, especially if we can get that ice area later on. I think this would make a pretty solid DLC, and if it looked like this, I would be very pleased with it. Given that the base game is already quite good, I am looking forward to it and hoping that it will be everything that the price point would imply. But we will have to see. Anyway, I'm going to probably be making a few more Pokopia wishlist videos about the DLC in the coming days, but we'll start off with this one. That'll be it for today, and I'll catch you guys next time.